Hey guys, I am the Comics Kid 2099 and I am here to review the final volume of the complete Age of Apocalypse epic. In total, there were 5 of these books, 4 volumes and a prelude volume. This is volume 4, so it's the last one from the Age of Apocalypse. And since I've already told you which issues are collected in all of the previous volumes in my previous videos, I will go ahead and tell you which issues are collected here. We have Generation Next issue 4, Excalibur issue 4, X-Man issue 4, X-Man issue 53 and 54, Factor X issue 4, Gambit and the X-Ternals issue 4, Amazing X-Men issue 4, Weapon X issue 4, X-Universe issue 2, X-Men Omega, parts of Blink issue 4, and X-Men Prime. I think after reading all of the Age of Apocalypse stuff, the best thing that I can say about this entire event is that it sounds better in concept than it does in execution. Years and years ago, when I discovered that for a very brief time in the 1990s, there was an alternate universe where the X-Men titles were drastically different than they were before or after, I got really excited. I first discovered the Age of Apocalypse from one of the issues of Legion Quest, where I saw the solicitations for all of the upcoming Age of Apocalypse titles, and just the idea of going back in time and changing something just a little bit different and making the Marvel Universe drastically different, that was very interesting to me. Granted, I am a pretty big fan of time travel stories, and I'm a huge fan of X-Men, so combining those two is a bit of a no-brainer. However, after reading all 4 of these volumes, I find that not all of it holds up entirely well. I've talked a little bit about this in some of my previous videos, how some of the series that were originally part of the Age of Apocalypse event didn't really feel like they needed to be part of this thing, and the only reason they existed was to replace one of the existing titles from before the Age of Apocalypse. For example, the 4 issues of X-Men that happened in the Age of Apocalypse, I found them to be very boring, where nothing really happened. Basically, for 4 issues, X-Man travels with a group of circus freaks and does absolutely nothing. And then he goes to avenge his dead father, who dies at the end of issue 3, and I feel like they really weren't concerned with making a good story that had a whole lot of anything to do with the Age of Apocalypse, as they were more concerned with creating a new character who can act as a sort of spin-off to the Age of Apocalypse. And part of my disdain of everything having to do with X-Man in these volumes is that he's kind of a whiny character who I don't really like at all. In a lot of ways, he reminds me of Anakin Skywalker from the Star Wars prequels, and you guys know that I really hated the Star Wars prequels, so having a reminder of that when I'm reading these books, not really a good thing. And speaking of X-Men, issue 53 and 54 is randomly collected in this final volume. Basically, it's 2 issues where X-Man teams up with Scott Summers and Jean Grey, and part of the Age of Apocalypse has, for some unexplained reason, merged with the Marvel Universe on the side of this big mountain somewhere, and these 3 go to basically destroy this part of the Age of Apocalypse and keep it from spreading out to the rest of the Marvel Universe. It's really kind of a crappy story, and I really didn't see any reason for it to be collected here. But I guess they wanted to thicken the book a little bit, make it about the same size as the previous 4 volumes, so they included those 2 issues. And some of the other series that were part of the Age of Apocalypse that I really didn't feel like added a whole lot to the overall experience was Weapon X. That was one where, at the very end, I kind of see what they're doing. Part of the problem is I spent about 6 months in between volume 2 and 3 not reading any Age of Apocalypse stuff, so with some of these series, I had forgotten a lot of the information that I really needed to know, as far as why is Wolverine over here in Europe, what is he doing, and so I felt like reading the last 2 issues of Weapon X, that was really kind of fluff. That whole 4 issues really didn't need to happen. I feel like it was one of those things where they had hammered out a plot point in the X-Men Omega issue, which was meant to kind of be a bookend that completed the Age of Apocalypse, if you will, and so they had to set up some of those plot points in some of the other series, and I feel like either A, the series did not need to be there at all, like Weapon X or X-Men, or B, the series did need to be there, but it didn't need to be 4 issues, which I would say Excalibur and Generation Next were both like that. The plot that happens over the course of 4 issues of Excalibur and 4 issues of Generation Next probably could have happened over the course of 2 issues, but since some of the other series needed to take 4 issues to happen, they went ahead and made all of the series take 4 issues, and so a lot of what goes on in this overall event, I feel, is just kind of padding because some of it needs to be 4 issues, so they made all of it be that long. And then there's the way that this thing ends, which it could be that because I've kind of been wanting to read the Age of Apocalypse stuff for so long, it just felt anticlimactic because I had been waiting so long to read this, but I felt like it was kind of anticlimactic. You've got all of the surviving X-Men from this world, they go to fight Apocalypse, and then you've got 4 characters, I think, from the Age of Apocalypse who switch over to the Marvel 616 world. I think at least 3 of these characters, the only reason that they were switched over to the Marvel 616 world is because they did not have counterparts in the 616 universe, so they needed some kind of complicated, kind of convenient way to get them over to the 616 universe that, if you think about it, doesn't really make sense. For example, it really doesn't make sense that Sugar Man or Dark Beast would be teleported 20 years into the past, while X-Man and Holocaust are teleported to the present day. I kind of think that they all should have been in the past, or they all should have been in the present day. And then after this, we see in the various X-Men titles after the Age of Apocalypse that characters like Dark Beast and Sugar Man have actually been involved with various subplots that have been going on with the X-Men titles dating all the way back to the 1980s. This is a kind of sloppy retcon saying that Dark Beast had been experimenting on the Morlocks and that's why Sinister hired the Marauders to kill all of the Morlocks. That's a kind of okay explanation, I guess, but I really didn't need Dark Beast to be part of the Marvel 616 universe in the first place. And the same with Sugar Man. I kind of like the idea that Genosha and or Genosha is basically just an island where hateful humans are using mutants as slave labor. The idea that a mutant is actually in charge of it all kind of takes away a little bit of the bite from that initial story where we first were introduced to Genosha and or Genosha. That's just my humble opinion, though. And then we've got the really weird thing where the Bishop, the original Bishop from the 616 timeline, who was accidentally stranded 20 years in the past and then grew 20 years older in the Age of Apocalypse, he is then teleported back 20 years into the past again, where we then see the original Bishop, who is 20 years younger than the Age of Apocalypse Bishop. They are both there, and then Age of Apocalypse Bishop is able to stop Legion from murdering Charles Xavier, and that prevents the Age of Apocalypse reality from existing in the first place. And for some unexplained reason, the original Bishop, who is 20 years younger than the Age of Apocalypse Bishop, he now has all of the memories of the Age of Apocalypse Bishop. And this doesn't make sense because it's not like this version of Bishop was actually there. In fact, the Age of Apocalypse Bishop actually disappeared after he prevents David from murdering Charles Xavier. So, what's going on here? Now, I guess it could be that the Macrane crystal somehow took the memories of the Age of Apocalypse Bishop and put them into the other Bishop, but then for that matter, why doesn't the Macrane crystal take the memories of the Age of Apocalypse Iceman and put them into the memories of the 616 Iceman? In my humble opinion, this is kind of just a silly thing that's never really explained just to get one of the characters from the 616 reality to remember the Age of Apocalypse, even though we already have 4 characters who already remember the Age of Apocalypse, and I'm assuming when Legion comes back to life, since he's sort of killed at the end of this, he will also maybe kind of remember the Age of Apocalypse, although maybe not, since he's kind of crazy anyway. Overall, this final volume clocks in at okay in my humble opinion. It's not a fantastic conclusion to the Age of Apocalypse, but it's not nearly as bad as the first couple of books from this series, because those first couple of books, if you will recall from my videos on those books, they were really bad about being fluffy, where over half of the book didn't really need to be there, but they were just to kind of make the books be bigger. I honestly think a lot of my problems with the Age of Apocalypse would have gone away if instead of trying to make 9 4-issue miniseries and then 2 bookend issues to begin and end the whole thing, instead maybe they should have done just one series where all of the plot points happen. And then if you only really need 2 issues to make the stuff that happens in Generation Next happen, then it can take 2 issues. And if you don't really need any issues at all, just to say that Wolverine is over here with the Eurasian High Council, then you can spend a page saying that Wolverine is over here with the Eurasian High Council, and then you don't need to waste 4 issues just to convey that information. In a way, I think this could have been done very similar to the DC Mega Series 52. You have multiple writers, multiple artists, but one series, and ultimately one story with a whole bunch of characters who all cross paths at various points. Now, in the mid-1990s, maybe they thought that this sort of thing just could not ever be done, as 52 is still about a decade away at this point, but I feel like this would have made for a better product. Or maybe they just wanted to do 9 4-issue minis to replace all of the existing X-Men series that were going on before the Age of Apocalypse, because that would make them more money. I really don't know, I wasn't there, I can't read their minds, so I'm just guessing here. And so that's really about all I have to say here. Overall, I would say my experiences with the Age of Apocalypse were about a 6 out of 10. Not the best, but not entirely a disappointment either. It was a lot of fun being an X-Men fan, being a fan of dystopian type worlds and alternate dimensions and stuff like that. That was all really fun, but I do feel like the execution of the whole thing could have used a little bit of work, and if I'm being honest, I shouldn't be that surprised, because a lot of the X-Men stuff from the 1990s isn't exactly the best, but that is neither here nor there. So anyway, I hope that this video was informative. I hope that it helped you in some way, and if it did, I hope you will like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I will be back tomorrow with some other kind of video. So until then, I hope you guys have a great rest of the day. Catch you later.